Going live. One. The thing is, we are live.
Wait,
Now we're live.
now we're live. This time for sure. Okay.
Yeah. Welcome back to the Comics Cube, everyone, for this live stream with Danny Fingeroth, author
Hello.
of A Marvelous Life: The Amazing Story of Stan Lee. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
Given that I just had a heart attack a couple of weeks ago, I think I'm very good.
That's I know you've been public about it, so I would think that a bunch of people, probably most everybody, your loyal fan base probably knows. But man, oh man, when you posted that, like just incidentally online, or maybe I don't remember, or maybe I'd contacted you to see, hey, you want to do something for Stan's 100th? And you said, yeah, probably, but I just had a heart attack, so I got to get back to you. That was like, well, I think what I even said was that was not the response I expected, but
I tried being cool about it.
you were cool about it, right? You were very, there's like a time, actually it reminds me of one of my favorite goofy things I've done was, we were having a holiday party at Bobby Chase's house, the Marvel and DC, and I forget, she's with one of those fancy digital publishing companies now. And they had a lot of candles lit all over the house, but the party was mainly in the living room. And I got in and I went and I was going to the bathroom and I had to pass through the kitchen. In the kitchen, I noticed that the curtains were on fire, that they'd caught fire from the candles. But I didn't want to panic everybody. So I remember I said something like, I think we got some fire action happening here in the kitchen. And what I should have said, holy shit. I was like, wait. So that's kind of like how you handle, I had a heart attack.
I know I was sending people that I was supposed to have meetings with. I was like, hey, I know we had a meeting, but I just had a heart attack. So
that's I'd say that's a reasonable excuse, no, I will, I speak for me, but I think I speak for your viewers, listeners, that I am really glad that you survived and came through it and are getting treatment, and I certainly wouldn't know looking at you that you had a heart attack, but
thank you.
Which might have meant you look terrible before. I don't know. You look. Sorry, I'm channeling Stan there. It's just, I'm very glad that you're back. I always enjoy doing your show, and I want to keep doing it for a long time.
Thank you.
So welcome back.
And welcome back to the show too, because today we're talking about Stan Lee's Centennial. It's his 100th birthday.
Kind of weird, huh? I mean, I guess if you were alive, who else is still? I guess Al Jaffe's still alive. Any other comics people who have
when Stan was born,
who made it to 100? Well, yeah, Stan was born same year. We'll try to put him in context. Same year as Kurt Vonnegut, Judith Christ. I forget who. I get him mixed up with Kirby. Because Kirby's year there a lot, but Vonnegut. And Jack Kerouac was also born the same year as Stan.
All of whom are gone now.
They were gone. Well, Judith Christ lived pretty long, and she knew Stan,
yeah,
and interviewed him, and was kind of friendly with Frederick Wortham, which is odd to have those two. Yeah, Christ was a protege of Wortham. She really. That's in my book. I can't believe you didn't memorize it. I interviewed her about her.
There's 377 pages in this thing.
I know. Well, that's including the notes and stuff. I interviewed her. Actually, I thought I was going to do it. Long before I thought of doing the Stan biography, I interviewed her for something else, and then I didn't think I had enough material to really justify a full thing in Alter Ego or something. But I had enough great quotes from her Yeah, she really idolized Wortham. You know, she really was quite taken with it. There's a lot of correspondence between the two of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, so Stan was born 100 years ago. If you've looked at your social media feed today, your head could spin from, and get whiplash from the alternating the love Stan and hate Stan postings on social media. Um,
Yeah.
it's and I get it, but the guy was complicated and he had a long life, a long career, and a lot of a lot of what we think is superheroes and think is comics and think is mass media. Um, this guy was involved with starting it, popularizing it, modifying it. Um, it's a pretty and a large for the beginning of it, I think without any sense of it being historic, right? I mean that 19-year-old, that what 18-year-old Stan Lee coming to work at Timely Comics in 1939 would think that we'd be having this. I mean, forget the means of communication, forget the method of communication that we're on this internet thing. But I mean, that anybody would talk about. I mean, that's one of the reasons he changed his name from Stan Lieber to Stan Lieber to Stan Lee, was because comics didn't get any respect. And why would you put your name on that when somebody might find out that you work in comic books or something?
Yeah.
So but
Didn't he also say, like, if he knew that they were going to last, he would have never had graduated Peter Parker from high school? So even in like
that
65.
I think right. That's and of course it's hard to know how much of that. Well, the decision was ultimately his because he was the editor, but it's hard to know if that came from him or from Ditko. But yeah, yes, I think one thing they wanted to do differently was have the characters, interestingly, age in real time, right? Because they couldn't imagine that anything would. I mean, especially Goodman was so quick to cancel stuff. He did it with the Hulk. He did it with a lot. He was still doing it even into the so-called Marvel Age. That if especially because he was restricted in the number of titles he could put out every month. He had a distribution deal for a number of reasons with DC Comics, which was distributing Marvel as well as Goodman's other magazines that were non-comics. But he didn't want to waste a slot on the stands. He only had like 8 or 10 titles he's allowed to put out a month. So if something wasn't selling, he just axed it, like he did with the Hulk and like he did with Amazing Fantasy, until they saw the numbers on Spider-Man, yeah, so I don't think, and the last time they'd done superheroes in the early 50s, they had all that iteration spurred by the Superman, the George Reeves Superman TV show, trying to latch onto that success, even
I
that.
never connected that.
Oh yeah, that was, I think it was totally connected, and um, they actually, I think they thought they might have had a deal for a Submariner show, which is why the Submariner in the 50s lasted like another 6 months beyond what the revivals of the other characters lasted. So yeah, that was definitely, I think comics don't, well, we know this now, that comics don't exist in a vacuum, but sort of when you look back on the history, that was the interesting thing, when I write comics history books or a biography, is to see how the context, the cultural, the pop cultural, the political, none of this stuff exists in a vacuum. By the way, my background, I'm not really outside, and I'm not really living in a black and white world. But that's the George Washington Bridge in Washington Heights, in New York, where Stan grew up. So that's what the background is, in case anybody was wondering. So yeah, it's an interesting milestone. It's an exciting milestone, but it does bring up all those same old arguments about who did what. That we'll never really know, even though a lot of people are sure they know. But we can get into that. So I mean, so
People have nothing better to do.
Right. Yeah, it's not like they're having a heart attack or anything. So actually,
take it from me, people. It's not worth it.
Even if it gets you out of some boring meetings, right? So when Duy told me that, and I knew we were doing this event for Stan's 100th, it definitely got me thinking about mortality. My own family has a lot of heart disease. I hope none of my insurance companies are listening, but but I think they know already. And that was, so I'll get into it as part of the presentation, but it really made me realize. And then Duy and I had some conversations just on Messenger, and sort of about possible direction. So there's some aspects of Stan's life and career and what he and Marvel brought to the table. It sort of jogged my thinking. So we'll get to it, but I thought we would just start on the chance that maybe there are 2 or 3 people who don't know that much about Stan aside from the cameos. I thought we'd go through. All right. So we will. So I'm going to share the screen here in a way that I usually get right by the 3rd or 4th time. So do I hit the share screen for it? Let me see. Let me open that up.
You just do share screen.
Wait, I think first I do the share screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Then, no. Let's see. Then I open this. I think I got to open that. Then I got to. Well, this is really. Maybe you should do it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Beautiful. View.
There it is.
Slideshow. There we are. Okay. I've only done this about 100 times. Okay. So that is Stan. That's the picture that, to people of the boomer generation, that was one of the few photos we got to see of Stan with his Frank Sinatra hat. That was because he hadn't yet gotten a toupee or implants. So that was Stan. That's right. Hold it. Let me see here. Why can't I? There we go. And that's a blow up of that photo. That was in the inside front cover of Fantasy Masterpieces, which came out, I think, in '65, maybe. It was it reprinted a lot of the Marvel monster stories and science fiction stories, and there is Stan introducing them in his Frank Sinatra hat and manhandling a copy, I think, of Fantastic Four 45, the first Inhumans appearance. But that was who we thought Stan was. That was, we hear him on the radio, but he was, we didn't have all media all the time, and we didn't have a million conventions all the time. So that was what we knew of Stan. This is up in Washington Heights, although not by the bridge, because the bridge, maybe, yes, by the bridge, because that's Stan on the left, his father Jack, his mother Celia, and that's Larry Lieber, the co-creator of Thor, Iron Man, and Groot.
The one no one mentions.
What, the creation no one mentions, right? Thor, Iron Man.
No. I mean, like, you talk about the creation of Thor, people are like Stan Lee and Jack Kirby.
Well, there you go. I mean, somewhere Larry is the scripter of record for that. And I guess this was just the year the bridge opened. Actually, Larry and the George Washington Bridge came about the same year, 1931. That's Stan's high school yearbook picture from DeWitt Clinton High School, where he said that his ambition was to get to the top and stay there, stay in big capital letters. Stan graduated Clinton. He had then come, this is a little out of sequence. This is Stan in the Army, where he worked on doing propaganda and training, teaching accountants, I think, how to make sure the soldiers got paid. He's drawing a character there. So this is I skipped ahead a little, but this is Martin Goodman, Stan's cousin by marriage, who had started this publishing company called Timely. And when Superman became popular, Goodman was publishing pulps, but he wanted to get in on these comic books, and specifically these superhero comic books. First one was called Marvel Comics, at Submariner and the Human Torch. But before long, he hired Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. They were the editor and art director. Though this is a picture of them when they'd already gone over to DC because they're working on Boy Commandos.
Yeah.
But that's Simon and Kirby, and they were the in-house staff. I guess they might have had some support production people, but they needed, and this was, of course, their big hit that they did for Goodman and Timely, Captain America. This came out a full year before Pearl Harbor. It was very daring to have Captain America punching Hitler on the cover.
Because at the time, the U.S. didn't know if it wanted to go into the war, right?
I think probably Roosevelt did, but I think there was a lot of resistance. I mean, don't forget World War I was not that long before, and that flu epidemic, as well. So it was, people had not yet fully been convinced that it was necessary to get involved in that war, but Jack and Joe were these Jewish kids who, understood, I think, maybe before a lot of other people, the menace that Hitler embodied. So in the third issue, so Joe and Jack needed a assistant, and Martin Goodman happened to have a cousin-in-law who was at a college and had been working a bunch of odd jobs around New York, and had aspirations to be a writer, and they hired him to be Simon and Kirby's assistant. And this is Stan's first published byline. He wrote, the comics used to have these text pieces, supposedly to enable them to get cheaper shipping rates from the post office. And so they weren't, these stories weren't taken that seriously. So this was in Captain America issue 3. The illustrations by Jack Kirby. So this technically is the first Lee and Kirby team up.
That's true.
Yep. So Simon and Kirby then, as is often the case in comics and in life, had a falling out with Goodman over money. He promised them a certain percentage of the profits of Captain America, but then he did some creative accounting, and they decided to go to DC. And before you know it, Stan was, as he used to say, Goodman asked him if he could fill in as the editor till he found a real grown-up. And apparently, till the day Stan died and Goodman was long dead, he still hadn't found that grown-up, because Stan was the editor for 30 years before moving on to become publisher. Anyway, Stan co-created characters like the Destroyer. The company didn't just do superheroes, they did every genre you can imagine over the years in the 40s and 50s. This was Ziggy Pig and Silly Seal, 2 characters that Stan created with Al Jaffe, who miraculously is still with us. Al, the Mad Magazine, went on to do Mad Magazine fold-ins and snappy answers to stupid questions. He's Al Jaffe. Look him up if you don't know who he is. Jeez. I have to do everything for you. I really am channeling Stan tonight, aren't I? It's really scary. And Stan had sort of his first, brush with being a celebrity when he wrote the cover article for Writer's Digest in 1947. There's Money in Comics by Stan Lee. And
is there money in comics, Danny?
There can be. I don't know if it's consistent, but there's money for somebody in comics. I think the Disney company is finding there's money in comics. Stan at that point was doing a ton of freelance writing that he could assign to himself because he was also the head editor. He was running a staff of dozens of people. Even after the superhero fad faded, they just did funny animals and romance and humor and monsters, and they did all this is Stan, maybe 10 in the mid 50s. I'm sure somebody could tell exactly by the comics on the wall there. Somebody colorized it. It was a black and white photo, so you can see just the hairline. Keep your eye on Stan's hairline. That's always a funny subtext. That's his actual hairline, and then here it is in the 50s. So here's Stan as because he could do all this freelance work, and they were putting out like 85, 80, 75, 80 comics a month. So, there was plenty of work to go around. So he had his staff job and his freelance work, and he had developed kind of a middle class lifestyle living out on Long Island. He'd come a long way from Washington Heights. You can see that's so this crazy and wild. So you can see this is the very beginning of magazines imitating Mad. There was the science fiction ones because they were popular. The science fiction was popular at EC Comics, where Gaines and Feldstein and Harvey Kurtzman were making history. The Human Torch, this must have been during the superhero revival in the 50s.
Yeah, that's one of the 3 issues.
Right, there you go. So that's right in the heart of it. But you can see it looks like there's a Millie, the model on the left. There's a Submariner on the lower right. But there's a Ace Carter Spaceman. But the company was known for imitating what other companies were doing. So that's why you see the Mad Magazine imitations and the EC science fiction. And they were fine with it. They were selling a ton of comics. They were doing crime, crime comics. You see the sort of a fantasy thing called Mystic. And this was one of the comics that Stan took a special interest in, called Menace. And he wrote all the stories in Menace. Which was unusual for him, because he usually liked to do humor and just light stuff, partly because that was more his nature, and also because it was easy for him anyway to kind of come up with quips. But this was a more serious horror title, again emulating a lot of what the EC Comics were doing. There was a big implosion. Your comics history, that the company went from being like the largest by volume to having this distribution crisis, and suddenly they were limited by this deal with DC to only doing theoretically 8 comics a month, but they usually stretch that. But and then Jack Kirby came back after having left with Simon in the 40s. He came back in the 50s. He'd had some arguments with some of the editors. Some these stories. Without going into all the detail, that's what's become a standard punchline in the comics history business, which is who won the fight between Jack Schiff and Jack Kirby, and the answer was Stan Lee, because Jack came back to Marvel, and they, Groot, who's of course now Groot, it was a lot more loquacious back then. This was co-created by Stan and his brother Larry, who, over the years had done a ton of work at Marvel and with Stan. And, but Groot was just one of 100 different characters like that. And this is from 10 years ago, from the Wizard World show in New York in 2013. That's Larry, and who's still kicking and writing and very much with us, and Stan, and a guy named Ken Bald, who was I think Stan referred to him as his best friend. And
really?
Yeah, huh. Ken did a bunch of work for Marvel in the 40s and 50s, went on to do syndicated newspaper strips. I think Dr. Kildare. Dr. Kildare. I'm blanking, but Ken Bald did a lot of wonderful syndicated strips, really very moody, very noir kind of looking. But they remained, through their lives, best, like I said, Stan called them his best friend, and you can see the affection between these guys. Yeah. So as Marvel was starting to grow, Stan, as the voice and face of Marvel, and before his toupee, he was entertaining this is the Princeton University comic book club. I think they call themselves the Theosophic Society. It had some very esoteric sort of academic Latin kind of name, but this was, when Stan, I guess Stan was always pretty accessible, but and there's a bust of Joan done by I believe that was sculpted by Arnie. If you saw that
Oh.
painting of Stan as all the heroes, that was painted by Arnie Sawyer. I'm pretty sure Arnie's father sculpted that. It's Joan Lee, Stan's wife. And there's two twin brothers, the guys who look like twins. The second, the Tulenko brothers, who I did an interview with online for a panel for a convention last year. Maybe if one of them, you can find it if you pull up the Tulenko. But that's the kind of people, so celebrities would visit and college students, and so then Stan did get a toupee. He decided that if he was going to be a celebrity, he always wanted to be an actor. I think he kind of wished he'd gone to Hollywood earlier, but somehow this Marvel thing obviously took off in a way that he could not have anticipated, but it did. And then I guess here he is in the first full flowering of his celebrity with a toupee that it's one of the greatest toupees I've ever seen, because if I didn't know it was a toupee, and the beard, that is, he's signing stuff Excelsior. That is Marvel as the first wave of Marvel as cultural phenomenon, and Stan as the embodiment of that phenomenon. So of course Stan
I'd never have known that was a toupee.
Yeah, I know, it's really good, isn't
it? Yeah.
Which is weird because his implants, he had early implants, and that his hair always looked weird. He was trying to duplicate that hairline on that Writer's Digest cover.
Yeah.
And yeah, he'd have stuck with this, he would have been much better off. So of course Stan was a writer, an editor, an art director, and publisher, but he drew a little bit. I mean, he actually was a fairly skilled caricaturist, but he was not a superhero artist, or he was not a comic book artist. So he teamed up with a zillion people. These, of course, are the most famous partnerships: Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. With Ditko, Doctor Strange, and Spider-Man. I know what you're saying. It was Ditko created Doctor Strange alone. I know. I know. But Stan,
I thought you were going to say that. I thought you were going to say that. I know that Jack Kirby came up with the initial idea for Spider-Man, like everyone says.
That is so complicated. We don't have enough time. No, you have an appointment in a couple of hours. So.
For what it's worth, I don't buy it.
I don't either. So without any of these three people, there's really no Marvel comics and no Marvel movies. And I think you could add to this Martin Goodman as well. But certainly without these three guys on the creative end. Yes, the creative end. I said it. There's none of what we know. This, of course, was the first. There's a bunch of different legends that Goodman heard that Justice League of America, which was doing well at DC, and wanted to come out with his own team book. And then I think, without thinking that Marvel, it didn't even have a name. It was Timely Atlas, sometimes Marvel. That MC in the upper right may or may not stand for Marvel Comics. That's never been confirmed. It may have been some obscure message to retailers about how to display the comics or when to return them, but probably Marvel Comics. It could also be Martin Comics.
Could be.
And so this is Fantastic Four 1. So somehow either Goodman told Stan he wanted superheroes, or Kirby came in with a bunch of sketches and ideas. Somewhere in that mix, and I have a feeling this might well be Stan, decided not to bring back Submariner, Human Torch, and Captain America. Although they brought back a Human Torch, but they made him Johnny Storm. And the other characters, the Thing is kind of one of the Atlas monsters. Mr. Fantastic is the elongated man or plastic man, take your pick. Invisible Girl was, been a lot of invisible characters, but so putting them together, they didn't have costumes. It's a theory that they were worried that they would get flack from DC if they put them in costumes right away. I think Stan had never loved superheroes, I think so. He did this reluctantly. I think all of it, the late 50s, early 60s, this is what the company was putting out the same month as Fantastic Four came out. So there's monster stories, romances, humor, cowboy stuff, horror and suspense. No superheroes, and I really think that at that. Sorry about the blurriness, by the way.
Can't tell.
I really think Stan just thought he was humoring Goodman, and they do this, and let's get it out of our system. DC is doing those superheroes, let them do it. We have our own problems, But of course, FF was successful, and then Hulk was not so successful, but Spider-Man came out in the last issue of Amazing Fantasy in cover dated August, so it probably came out around May or June of 1962, so about a little under a year after Fantastic Four. And then the same month or within the same period, Ant-Man and Thor and Iron Man. Iron Man's a little bit later. Then Spider-Man got his own comic. And of course, the Fantastic Four were the Wolverine of their day. So if you wanted to sell a new comic, you put the Fantastic Four on the cover. And then, let's skip ahead 60 years, to, the phenomenon that is Marvel, that is Spider-Man, the multiple universes where you can have a movie that's based on having 3 different actors who played Spider-Man be in the same movie, where you can have something called the Spider-Verse to explore with all the different iterations. This all comes out of what Stan and Steve came up with this, wasn't quite a throwaway. They ended up canceling the magazine, but you can see when Amazing One came out, you could see that it's most likely they thought they were going to still be the shorter, like 11, 12-page stories that would have been in the next Amazing Fantasies.
Yeah.
Fantastic Four gave birth to 1 million characters. Obviously you have to give probably the bulk of the credit to the force of nature that was Jack Kirby. But that's not, you can't take away from Stan as shaping it, guiding it as editor and as scripter. The Stan's voice and Stan's editorial direction, as much as Kirby may often have hated it and bridled at it, people don't have to like each other to make great comics, and this is proof, and I think they did like each other sometimes. I think it's too easy to say that they didn't. So of course the Black Panther became the Black Panther movie, one of Stan's classic cameo. This is one of my favorite cameos, and this is the best of Stan. This is and the hair, he actually grew into the hair doesn't look too bad. I guess in a movie they can doctor it up so it looks, but there's Stan. I think he's stealing some poker chips from another character in that scene. And of course, then we just had Wakanda Forever, which was even bigger, I think, than the first Black Panther movie. So now, Duy, you'd put some ideas in my head about the Avengers, So obviously, in the meantime, Thor, Iron Man, Hulk, Ant-Man, the Wasp had come about, and this is, by the summer of 1963. So that's less than 2 years after Fantastic Four. These characters had all been established. That these had all been established by these 3 guys within this 20-month period is mind-boggling. So they finally got a team of the characters, which again, skipping ahead another 60 years, Avengers Endgame. just this whole odyssey of the brain children of these guys. And so Duy, inspired by Duy's heart attack, I still, and then by the question you asked me, you said, well, what, I know you were being a little facetious, like nobody ever talks about the Avengers, but I mean, nobody talks about them. Nobody, really
In the
talks about
comics, yeah.
and the basic, the ones, I guess the Fantastic Four is the flagship. Spider-Man then, also was vying with Fantastic Four for most popular, and then there was the Avengers.
What is it safe to say? Because I've said it before. Like, obviously, I wasn't there. I can only view it from the context of history. Is it? I'm not going to ask you to pick which one was more popular, the Fantastic Four or Spider-Man. I feel like that's an impossible question.
Oh no, Fantastic Four was way more popular.
It was?
For the first, well, it was the world's greatest comic magazine. I mean, look, I think Spider-Man quickly caught up, but Fantastic Four was the X-Men of its time. There was nothing like, if you were 10 years old or 8 years old, there was nothing like Fantastic Four. And
Really?
and that thing, like I said, your question kind of combined with Tony Stark's heart issues that I related to because of my family background, especially my father having had a heart attack when I was 7 years old. And so that was, maybe a year or two later is when I started reading Marvel comics. So I mean, that there was a character, Tony Stark, who had a heart condition and a mustache like my dad's too, which was interesting. I related to that in a way that I didn't even know I could relate to a fictional character. I mean, and so that that sort of so wanting to do something relevant and connected and maybe a little different approach, I realized that with what Stan and Jack and Steve, the fantasy that they hooked into, which had been, I think, true of superhero comics and I think to an extent at DC, was the fantasy that children have of being middle-aged adults. It's a weird, maybe I'm revealing too much about myself, but clearly those books sold a shit ton, and were regarded as groundbreaking. So here's Peter Parker, who from page 1 of Amazing Fantasy 1, when all the other kids are going out to have fun at the chocolate shop and Peter is just alienated. I mean, you get the idea, but he's the one we're supposed to identify with. And what do we identify with? This enormous burden of responsibility that starts with, of course, Uncle Ben being murdered. Spoiler alert. I'm sorry if I ruined it for you, but Uncle Ben does get killed and he doesn't get better. So Peter, it's all my fault. If only I'd stopped them when I could, but I didn't. And now Uncle Ben is dead. Holy crap. That's not a lot of fun to read. I guess it's cathartic. Yeah. And then before you know it, I mean, so this is, I'm not sure what issue this is from, but it's a Ditko issue. So it's from within the first 3 years. I can't, let's see, I can't. Can you read the Peter's thought balloon?
Yeah. This is what I've been afraid of. I can't take the chance of Aunt May being alone in case she has another attack. This is why I can't afford to fight a Spider-Man. Gosh, we're almost out of medicine.
I forgot about Aunt May's heart condition, but at least she was, I don't know how much older she could have been than Peter, but she always was drawn like she was at least 85, So I mean, her Aunt May being sick was not as shocking as Tony Stark having a heart condition, but this was our fun. This was reading about this guy's, taking on really middle. I mean, this is more like a 50-year-old adult who's worrying about their parents. So and they made it work. I mean, I think they were, and again, I'm not saying any of this was conscious. This is all like sort of after the fact, but these were like middle-aged guys with middle-aged concerns. And somehow they were brilliant enough to turn it into entertainment. Here's the end of the Fantastic Four. They're evicted. Most children don't worry about being evicted, even if their parents are worried about, right? The Fantastic Four have lost status. They've gone from being as the thing says, heroes 1 minute, bums the next. How did it happen to us? Well, if you've ever had a career or wanted a career, you know that that's your fear, that you're going to be thrown out of your skyscraper headquarters, and your worst enemy, who's trying to get you to bed with your wife, is like mocking and smirking, and has soon they'll be at the mercy. This is like incredible middle-aged midlife crisis trauma that's being lived out. Here's Giant Man talk about not being able to handle a house, right? Oh, we bought this
I've
house.
never seen this panel before, and it's hilarious. I love it.
It's great. It is hilarious. It's like, oh my God, we bought this house in the suburbs. We really made, oh shit. Oh boy, it's back to Washington Heights for us. I mean, it's just, it's this never ending midlife crisis. Don Blake, Jane is so beautiful. If only I could tell her. But I daren't, for a girl so lovely would never marry a lame man. If she knew I loved her, she'd probably quit her job. Then I would never see her at all. Now, look, obviously a 12-year-old kid with a crush on a girl in his class can relate to that. But that's really like a 30-something sort of view of love and life. And then, of course, when Thor, after, and then, of course, not only is he worried about that she might not like him that way, but then he has that whole thing with Odin forbids him to marry a mortal girl, and then and then they go to Asgard, and it becomes a complete disaster. Now I know they've done 100 riffs on this, and obviously the last Thor movie deals with it, but that is literally 60 years later. What these guys were doing and the ground they were breaking was bringing a midlife crisis to us all. And then, Duy, this is what I immediately thought of. And this, my father had a heart attack when I was 7. He had several others. He had, it was a constant presence in my life. So here's one of my comic book superheroes based on the premise. This is one thing my father didn't have, was a magical chest plate that he could charge up. And then go, have bullets bounce off him. But that's where the fantasy could. But the idea, and again, this was as much Tony Stark's thing as Captain Marvel saying Shazam, as the Human Torch saying Flame On. This was, here's an issue where Tony Stark is having a pain in his chest and he has to recharge. And this is your midlife crisis. You've reached the pinnacle. You're the head of your own big munitions company, and suddenly you're humiliated by collapsing in front of your trusted employees. Issue after issue, and the Avengers also. And as I told Duy, I censored out of regard for you just some of the even more horrifying images. But this guy is just plugging in all the time. And then there's and that's why Tony Stark claims he can never get married. Never mind, he can't take his shirt off with a date. This is if the plate isn't regularly recharged with booster shots of electricity, my shrapnel pierced heart would soon stop. I'm sorry, Duy. I hope this stuff. I hope you're not having flashbacks here.
I'm gonna have to say, I feel like a handsome billionaire, regardless of all that, would be able to get it.
But I think heart disease always has been a major health concern, and especially before the days of transplants and miracle surgeries. I don't think I was the only person walking around concerned about a loved one's heart condition, and it was just like brilliant that they came up with this. And was it Stan, was it Jack, was it some combination? I will never, but certainly it was Stan's decision to run with it and keep going with it. And it's a weird kind of fantasy, but it really, I remember being very moved by it, and that was the level that made my relating to Iron Man, and still does. It was interesting. right? When they did cure his heart issues, that they gave him the alcoholism.
Yeah.
It was, that was his feat of clay. And then this was, I think I had nightmares about this page. This is a symbolic splash, but it says, last issue, due to his epic battle with the fearsome Black Knight, Tony Stark found his injured heart needed the power of the additional transistors in his armor in order to keep beating. This means he has become a prisoner of his Iron Man identity, for he dares not remove his life-saving armor, not even for an instant. That sounds like sound science to me. But I mean,
Of course.
holy cow, Don Heck and Dick Ayers here. Wow.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah,
would not have known. This doesn't look like Don Heck from a glance.
yeah. Well, Don
Yeah.
Heck was a terrific artist, and and then Ayers inking him. I was looking back through a lot of old Iron Mans, in preparation for this, and I got to read it again. That stuff was that's they put so much more work into this than they needed to. I don't know if it was Stan making them or now that the stuff was catching on, they took a pride in their work, but there's a level of detail and attention paid to this that's really amazing. So I started thinking, who are the other cultural avatars of middle class, middle-aged midlife crisis in the 60s? Because I'd ask Stan, and he would often deflect questions like this when you asked him about influences. He'd like to give credit to people you wouldn't expect him to give credit to. So I remember I asked him once, were you influenced by Woody Allen? I think you like, Philip Roth and Bernard Malamud and the other Jewish American novelists of the 60s. And he claimed, no, it was, as far as not the superhero stuff, but as far as the human interest and the angst and the introspection. But here's this guy, Duy, here's a quiz. You know who this guy is?
Ed Sullivan.
It's the Ed Sullivan Show.
It's not Ed Sullivan?
No, it's on the set of the Ed Sullivan Show. It's Alan King.
Oh, okay.
You know that name? You know who he was?
No, I don't know who Alan King is, but I'm like, oh my God.
But you're right, it's the Sullivan Show. Alan King was a comedian from a similar background to Stan and Jack, dirt poor Jewish immigrant parents, literally fought his way out of the streets. And yet he became very successful, very wealthy. You actually seen him. He's in one of the Scorsese pictures. He plays like a mob boss who gets rubbed out in maybe Goodfellas or anyway. Alan King was the spokesperson for the entitled, aggrieved upper middle class suburbanite. He was very funny, and he was on Sullivan like every other week. Very funny, very popular, but it was always about about how he was treated on an airplane or something that happened at the golf course. It was always something of aspirational upper middle class life, and Stan, I don't think Stan lived in as fancy a part of Long Island as Alan King did, but Alan King, I think, was to comedy what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were to comics. Ditko is a different story, but even he, I think, channeled that sort of its time, this super prosperous post-war America, the Eisenhower Kennedy Johnson years. And then I know, I discussed this with Stan. Stan was a huge fan of Carl Reiner and Mel Brooks. This was Mel Brooks before he made any movies. This was Mel Brooks as a 2,000-year-old man and as a lot of other characters, because 2,000-year-old man. And again, Carl Reiner was the creator of the Dick Van Dyke Show. It's another show about suburban middle class life and its ups and downs and its tragedies and comedies. And I think there was some way that the Marvel comics, and I think the Marvel comics of Stan Lee, channeled this guy and Mel Brooks. It is funny that old man Stan and old man Mel are not that far apart in kind of their affect and their relation to the world. So I'll just wrap up with these are Stan's cameos. This is the lovable old Stan. That most people who are not devoted comics fans know. This was his last cameo.
This is insane. I know where every single one of those is from.
This is his last one. This is
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I love the one in Doctor Strange because he's reading Huxley's The Doors of
Perception.
Perception. Yeah, right, and yeah, and that's his last one where he was channeling his 70s self. So this is Stan and me. I was his moderator for several years at the Wizard World show. So this is Stan as entertainer. Because I think the other thing that Stan channeled about those comedians, of course, was not just what they represented, but their Borscht Belt, old Jewish man comedy. So here is Stan. And if anybody has seen this PBS show that's on this week about Dick Cavett and Groucho Marx, it's interesting how, Groucho and Stan, this Groucho's Cavett in the background. So I guess here's me doing my best to play Dick Cavett to Stan's Groucho. But if you ever saw Stan, at a convention or or on TV, that there's not a whole lot of gap between this guy and this guy. I think there's an aspect of Stan that in his later, I guess he always had the comedian in him, but he really embraced it in his later years. And if we can get it to work, that one of the writers from a very endearing video clip. And that is my presentation. That's my book. If you want to get in touch with me, as far as I know, I'm the only Danny Fingeroth on any of those media. So, anywho,
I believe you are. Yes.
So I'm gonna stop the share. Anyway, so that I thought that was an interesting. Like I said, I'm not glad you had a heart attack, and I wish that hadn't happened to give me the idea, but it did strike me that look, most superheroes have some kind of tragic beginning. Krypton blows up, Bruce Wayne's parents are murdered, so they all have some, dramatic intensity. But if I had of my childhood and for many years, the DC superheroes seemed invested in staying immature children, whereas the Marvel superheroes, seemed intent on aging prematurely and being middle-aged even when they were like 17,
Well, I feel like DC superheroes in the Silver Age had like a feeling like they were kind of your dad. Like you don't know what their problems are.
Right. They were like you. They were exactly like your dad. I mean, that was the fantasy, right?
Yeah.
Turned out Iron Man was just like my dad, but not in the way that, not in that idealized way that Bruce Wayne or Clark Kent are like your dad.
Yeah.
So
we have a comment from the chat from a David Reichlin saying terrific video, wonderful stories. Danny is a true expert and great raconteur. Love the images.
Well, thank you. Okay. I know you probably had to go through like 10,
No, actually, it's the only one because I haven't told anyone to send comments.
Okay.
Send comments, people. Go ahead.
So, look, Stan is it's quite amazing, right? Everybody wants to be successful, but I don't think Stan ever envisioned the kind of success those characters would have. I think it's kind of one of the tragedies of his life that he did fine in Hollywood, right? He produced a ton of cartoons. He had his name on a lot of things, but obviously he never had the kind of success or garnered the kind of respect or whatever you want to call it, gravitas in the Hollywood stuff that he did in the comics, so he set a high bar for himself, he went from being the biggest fish in the pond to being just like another guy hustling around Hollywood trying to sell property. And then, it was a nice confluence of factors that at the end of his life, the movies and the TV shows um, found a way to resonate with audiences while he was still alive and able to enjoy that. But I think he would, I think he would have liked it 20 or 30 years earlier. But
Yeah.
but it's an incredible legacy. That's and did he do everything wonderfully or angelically? No, but he was a middle-aged guy trying to support his family in a middle-class existence.
And like I said before to you, I think based on reading your book, a lot of people say that he was Martin Goodman's nephew, but based on reading your book, I'm like, I don't even think Martin liked him that much.
They have. I mean, this is sort of one of those things I've discovered more as I've gone on. I don't even know if it's a matter of like. I mean, I don't know. But Martin. Martin had Martin actually had a son who was interested in publishing and ended up being reasonably successful, but Stan at that point had the clout to not let him come in and take over Marvel. So I think there was a point when Martin looked at Stan almost like a son, especially because Stan's own father was very moody, very couldn't keep it. I think he was a skilled dress cutter. I think he actually was skilled in that, but he was very couldn't get along with people, couldn't hold a job, and he was exactly who Stan didn't want to be. So I think for Stan, Goodman seemed to be much more involved in Stan's life than I. When I wrote the book, I had some idea of it, but in the years since, I realized that how important Goodman was. I don't think he looked at every comic Stan put out, but I think, he was enough of a control. He trusted Stan, and Stan was a relative. But I have a feeling Goodman was peeking in. There's a piece that was in the Sunday New York Times in 1972. Kirby had gone over to DC, so it was about that. But it was also, but it's interviewing Stan and Martin about how that affected Marvel and what Marvel Comics in the 1970s would be. And there are some really condescending comments about Stan that Goodman makes in that article. It's like the guy has been working for you literally for 30 years. He has created this juggernaut of Marvel Comics. And I mean, the digs are so nasty. It's like, yeah, Stan. I mean, he was talking about Stan as if he was still 17 years old, even though he was like 50.
It's like that uncle at any family reunion.
Yeah, well, but yeah, he was one of those cousins who was old enough. He wasn't even that much older. Let me see. He was born. I guess he was. He was born in 1908, I think. So he would have been 14 years older than Stan. But he was very avuncular, and he had that prematurely white hair.
Yeah.
So he but I think that because Stan, right, the way Stan used to talk about it was, it's right that it's just a coincidence that he happened to be working for his cousin's company, and he was related to Stan like two different ways. It's so like another one of Stan's cousins was married to Martin, was related to Martin's. I would have to literally look it up. It's so complicated.
It's one of those things.
Yeah. Well, it's very, I think it was maybe Uncle Rob. That's what they called Uncle Robbie, because he was literally an uncle. But yeah, I think that, that's an interesting avenue. The problem is there are actually several people who have done a lot of research on Martin Goodman, enough to write a book. However, I don't think it's a big market for people buying books about Martin. I mean, not going to be, even if you put on what are you going to put? The real father or one of the creators or the public, what could you put on the cover that would make people go Martin Goodman crazy at this point in history, right? I mean, you and I would, and probably a lot of the people watching. But overall, but there's been a lot of research. I mean, Goodman was a pretty relatively high profile guy. He, while he started out in pulps and comics, he quickly grew that to be all sorts of other magazines. Michael Vasallo, Doc V, if you know that name, probably has done the most research and has the most complete collection of Goodman's non-comic book publications. And it's astonishingly depressing because they're all these schlocky knockoff magazines. Goodman tried once in a while to do, high class things like Life magazine, ripping off Life magazine or Reader's Digest or some of the other. I mean, Timely, the name of the company Timely is to make people think of Time Life, the loose publications.
All right.
So Goodman Goodman put out a lot of magazines, and he wasn't he wasn't looking for the kind of celebrity Stan was, but there's a lot of photos of him in his various magazines, especially the Hollywood magazines. It's like if there was some Hollywood starlet in town in visiting New York from Hollywood, she would just happen to stop by to have lunch with Martin Goodman, and there'd be pictures of it in the magazine. So he's all the what I've seen, all the companies, Marvel and DC and Harvey, Archie, they're all dynasty stories. They're all started. They may as well be like Game of Thrones. They're just all these family dynasty stories, and depending on which sibling you talk to, you get a totally different point of view on what really happened. I mean, it's kind of fascinating, but that's, especially because I guess if it was just somebody in the garment business or whatever business, we wouldn't know about it. But because these, all these companies are in the business of fueling our imaginations and our fantasies, and they put out these comics and movies and TV shows, it sort of makes it, to people like you and me, more interesting. But they're all family sagas.
Yeah, like a lot of things. I feel. What do you think? Many years later, right? Obviously, Stan, I think, did not live to see Avengers Endgame. But how do you think Stan would have reacted if he had seen, that scene with the portals, with everybody coming out, and then much later on seeing the 3 Spider-Men on the screen?
Oh, I think he would have, what's not to love? I mean, that, I think he made a lot of his life. I think he wanted to do stuff that wasn't comics. I mean, look, everybody was changing their names who worked in comics because they didn't want people to know they worked in comics, and he always would say, saving Stanley, Martin Lieber for the great American novel. I don't know if he did very little prose writing that I know of. So I don't know if he, that might have just been a nice soundbite to say. But I think he would, I think he would love to have gone to Hollywood, either to have success when he was almost 60 when he went to Hollywood, which in Hollywood
Is ancient.
May as well be 200 if you're 60, right? I mean, that's, so, but I think whatever he needed to have, either to break him out of that comfortable middle-aged life, whatever, he wasn't ready to do it till he was that age. But so I think he was, for a lot of his life, I think he would have said, well, it's nice that they're successful, but I'd much rather be successful producing, serious movies with my pal, the director, Alain Resnais, or something like that. But I think probably the last 10, 20 years, I think he realized this is what he was and who he was and what he was doing. And I think he did, I think he did take a lot of pride in it,
Yeah.
He was, I think people are complicated. I think he found a comfortable lifestyle and a way to be a celebrity and to make a decent living, although not as much, I mean, just in case anybody there who doesn't know it, Stan did not own those characters and was, did not get a percent, don't feel bad for him. He did very well. He lived very nicely, but he did not have the kind of money that you would think somebody who co-created all those characters would have,
Yeah.
So I think he came to peace with it, because like I said, he was never lacking in competence, right? But I think there was a dark side. I think when he wrote those stories, again, with Kirby, with Ditko, with his brother, but I think there was a part of Stan that understood loss, in all senses of the word, and sadness, and trauma, I think he wasn't ready to go till he was to the West Coast till he was ready to go. But I think it seemed to me, having studied him and known him, and talked to other people about him, that Hollywood was where, he really had that Hollywood fantasy. I think he realized, I think he liked acting, but realized his limitations fairly early. But he was a ham.
Because he could only be Stan.
Oh, that's interesting. I guess, I guess I wonder, you can only be Stan. I guess
Like, you think he could have ever toned it down for another part?
There's a video that you can look up, of Stan in like 1968 of, I think he wanted to be David Susskind, or, you know what I mean? Like a PBS style moderator. And he had a bunch of, student radicals on.
Yeah.
And he was playing the role of concerned middle-class suburban father. And he was, it was a pilot, and it's on YouTube. It was a pilot, for a show. I imagine he thought it was going to be an ongoing talk show where he would just interview people and talk with, but he was clearly out of his depth, but he was playing the role. It was a little different role. It was more subdued. It was more serious, like Charlie Rose or somebody on a serious, it was sort of, if you can imagine, Stan as Christian Amanpour, that's what he was trying to be. And yeah, it wasn't working. And also I think he was afraid to really voice. It wasn't so much him voicing opinions on the show, it was really like suburban dad going, "What is it with you kids?" But I think he realized that if he was going to keep doing that and voice even mild opinions, he might alienate some of the readers of the comics, which was his bread and butter. But I think that was, and he did do some serious writing for Goodman's magazines. I guess it's not acting. So could Stan play anybody who wasn't Stan? Probably not. Probably some variation of that role, in the Mel Brooks, Alan King, continuum. So yes, but I do think he would like to have been a producer, a screenwriter, a director. I think that it was that classic thing of growing up. I mean, all I guess you hear it from a lot of people, but the people who I talk to, a lot of were the comic book creators of Stan's generation, and they were all infatuated with movies, but for whatever reason, they didn't make the big leap out to out to Hollywood, but I think Stan would have liked to have done that.
Is it harder to move from comics into movies just because you're working with more people, more coordination, maybe
I,
just more autonomy?
it's definitely, there's less red tape, there's more autonomy. Yeah. But some people have done it, but has anybody gone from being a comic book person to being like a successful name brand director? I don't know. Has anybody? I mean,
So
Terry Zwigoff, he does documentaries. Has anybody? I don't know if anybody has. Maybe somebody can answer that. Yeah, you have a lot of autonomy in comics. And look, the great thing about comics is you have an idea on Monday, it gets drawn on Tuesday, gets colored on Wednesday, and it's on the stands the following Monday. I mean, there's if you want to or need to, you can go from idea to finished product like that, especially with the internet now, but so that's, I think I think Hollywood is a high level of bullshit, so either if you're not good at it, or if you don't have patience for it, or if your feelings are easily hurt, but that's an interesting question. Really, I think, but to go the other way around from Hollywood to comics, people do that.
J. Michael Straczynski,
Right.
To an extent, Kevin Smith. We have a comment in the chat, which is Jeff Johns tried. Yeah, that's it.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. I would guess if you got a Hollywood directory, you would probably find a lot of names of people who didn't become big stars or world famous directors, but are probably making a nice living, doing stuff, so.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you could probably do it. But yeah, if you want to, I don't know if you can go from being, and I guess Stan did it in his way, but he did need the Marvel properties to do it, in order to achieve the level of fame that he had when he died. It had to be with the Marvel properties, not with his movie about pollution with Alain Resnais, which I think is what he would have loved to have done.
You did say earlier that he was never really a fan of superheroes. Do you think that he found peace in that, like in the last 10 years, when he saw how much joy they were bringing to everyone?
Stan, look, he died at 95, almost 96, right? So, I think he liked the action, so to phrase the question again, or was he?
You said that he never really liked superheroes.
Oh,
but do you think in the last 10 years he found peace in?
Yeah. So yeah, I think whatever it took to get. Look, I think, say if Fantastic Four came out in 1961, and 5 years later the superheroes were getting more and more popular, I think he was able to, maybe what he did, and Kirby as well, and Ditko as well, is they transformed the superhero archetype into something that they could identify with, yeah, so boy, that's, Stan went to high school with Patty Chayefsky. And over his life, he was friends with Tom Wolfe. He liked knowing that, but he and Chayefsky weren't friends. I mean, I don't even think they knew. They went to this huge high school, but they were. So I think he liked the idea of doing something more serious, and I think he enjoyed writing humor. But it's funny. It's an obvious kind of question. I think he realized this is the business I'm in now. I'm in the superhero business. And I'm also in the Stan Lee business. I think that was the main business he was in. So I think he made it a way. I mean, you may have known what he did do. Is that you or me?
I think that's you.
Oh, it was, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That was anyway, I think there was a butt dial by a friend of mine. That because my phone is near my computer. Not that I've
Yeah.
ever purposely arranged it to do that, but and what the hell was I saying?
He was in the superhero business and in the Stan Lee
Yeah, yeah,
business.
he
I
was.
noticed you didn't say the comic book business.
Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I know what I was gonna say. Well, in 1972, he became publisher. And although he kept writing the newspaper strip, which had some prestige in his mind because it was a newspaper strip, and that was always the holy grail for comic people was of that generation, certainly was syndicated strips, both for prestige and for money, you know. But after he became publisher, he rarely wrote comic books. I think he just had his fill of comics. Yeah, I think he saw himself in the entertainment business, in the media business. Yeah, I think, uh, you know, so yeah, I don't think, I think at a certain point he just had it with comic books. I think he found, there was, I think a quote in my book, an article I found, or an interview, maybe an interview with somebody, that yeah, he found the day-to-day in the trenches work of comics depressing, because I guess he was looking at what people were doing, as excited as we were, when I worked at Marvel for close to 2 decades. For him, it was old news. I mean, he really, yeah, I mean, look, I think he loved smart, creative people, right? He loved working with Jack. He loved working with Steve. He loved working with just about anybody. He loved, I think there's a lot of us like that, where we just like to be making stuff and communicating with people and entertaining and sharing ideas and passions. But I think he came from a generation where not only did comics not get respect, but there were like congressional hearings about how horrible comics were. I think a lot of people of that generation never got over that. I think they were always looking over their shoulder. I mean, I remember just having discussions even when I was working at Marvel. Like, is this too violent? Is this too sexy? Is this too this? Is this too that? I had a famous argument with a famous artist about an eye being poked. And I mean, did I give a
You
shit?
can say his name. Everyone knows this story.
Yes. Well, if everybody knows, I don't have to say his name because, as far as I know, we're on friendly terms. So, I love the guy, and really, did I give a shit if an eye was poked? I mean, no, but I wanted to protect my job. And it was enough of an issue in the 1990s that.
I mean, speaking of that guy, though, fewer people remind me of Stan in the sense that I feel that, would you say that maybe Stan was ahead of his time? That because now I feel like when you're developing a new comic, like let's say Image develops a new comic or whatever, there's already like pitches for a pilot for a TV show or a movie pitch or whatever. I feel like Stan kind of got that you had to kind of go beyond just one medium in order for it to be like a phenomenon.
But I think it wasn't just the celluloid, By the way, I think if anybody could be Stan Lee, it would be Todd McFarlane. I think if he was interested, he could be. I don't know if he's interested, but he seems like the natural heir to that position. You see, I think Stan wanted, the reason Stan would constantly tell you that he went to high school with Patty Chayefsky, because he wanted to be Patty Chayefsky, you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to figure that out, but I think I
Yeah,
think
go
he
ahead.
did. I think he did make peace with being Stan Lee. You know.
We have a question from Love Will Kill. It's an interesting name. Would you say Stan changed the script from readers looking up to heroes to readers self-identifying with heroes?
I think they managed to pull off that you could both. I mean, I think that's the trick of any successful fictional character. But he flipped the script. You know, it's very glib. You can say, "Oh, superheroes, you know, heroes with feet of clay," and you know, that's the easy. Excuse me. You know, you could relate to them, but still look up to them because they always did the right thing, right? That's, you know, that was sort of my limited patience with things, with all the Watchmen imitations that came after Watchmen. You know, I mean, some of them were very good, but a lot of them just sort of took what Stan and Jack and Steve did, and they took it to the next level, the next level, the next level. Yes, I get it. If real people had superpowers, they would be really fucked up and people would die and be raped and pillaged and really a lot of horrible stuff would happen. I get it. That's not the fantasy I'm interested in, though. You know, I like,
Same,
huh?
same. I have the news for that, people.
You know, I like the idea that somebody can be riddled with psychological and financial and physical problems, but rise above it and save the day and do the right thing. I find that inspiring.
Right. Like it's not Stan, but it's exactly what I say about Superman too when people are like, "Oh, nobody that good can be that. Nobody that powerful can be that good." And I'm like, "And what's your point?" Do you do you think that so we never really talk about Stan's purported favorite character of all time, which is the Silver Surfer. And
Yeah.
what do you think that is about that character that Stan latched onto so much?
Huh. Um, well, I guess at the risk of treading on cliche, which never stopped me before, you know, he's a literal tabula rasa, right? He's a blank slate. He's you know, I look, you know, Stan wrote this poem called God Woke. You ever read that
Yeah,
poem?
yeah,
It's actually pretty good. And it's
pretty
like
good
it's a
poem.
really long poem. And one day I was visiting my orthopedist to check out my knee. And turned out he's a comics fan. And we were just chit-chatting, you know, and he said, did Stan, was he religious? Did he believe in God? And I said, you know, I think he was an atheist. That's what he always said. And he said to me, you know, I said, but he wrote a poem called God Woke. And my doctor said to me, you know, someone who's not concerned with, you know, with religion and matters of mortality doesn't write a poem called God Woke, you know. So I think Stan, there was a part of him that, you know, you say to me, did he like superheroes? I think he found like a way through his love of things like Shakespeare to relate to them. I think he found um entree and I think the surfer, right? If you can get past the idea that he commandeered one, you know, what was probably one of Kirby's favorite characters to be his own, he saw this character as a way for him to express sort of a cornball but universal philosophy of love and understanding that really seemed important to him. You know, I mean, I think part of him went, oh, I'm being read by the hippies in Berkeley, and they love all that flower power bullshit. I mean, there was definitely a part of him that problem. But then I think he, you can see on that show, that talk show. I think there was a part of him that really aspired to a sort of nobility and universality of mankind, and as cynical as he could be, and seeing the cutthroat stuff in Hollywood and in comics. I think there was still a part of him that aspired to be a philosopher and to help heal human. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but to help heal humanity and to some way leave the world a better place than he'd found it. And for whatever reason, the surfer, who's a goofy character. I mean, I was flipping through my book, as I actually don't do that often, but I thought since I'm doing this, and there's a quote from John Romita where he says something like, only Stan Lee would have accepted the Silver Surfer. A DC editor would have laughed you out of his office. You came up with a naked guy. You came up with the Oscar statuette riding a surfboard, But not only did Stan accept it, he went with it and just made it this phenomenon. So I think that's, you can see it in Thor's, all the characters, and then would make speeches, and the thing would you don't have to make a speech, the big brain, I think there was a part of Stan that felt, if you'll pardon the expression, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Not to say that he couldn't also be all those other, not so great things that humans do, but I think he really felt that he could maybe help people see things clearly. And the surfer, why the surfer? It was a great visual, and a tabula rasa. But maybe because the surfer was like the second flight of Marvel heroes, right? Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, all this
That's
stuff.
true.
They're just churning the stuff out. Let's get it done. Let's make Martin happy. Oh my God, suddenly it's popular. Let's take it. And then suddenly some room to breathe, maybe. And then, here's like a second wave, which is probably what Kirby felt too, which is probably where, that's just, yeah. So I think at his best, that's what Stan saw in the surfer.
Well, I feel two things about that whole thing about Stan commandeering that particular creation, which is one, the idea that Jack had for the surfer, which I believe is that he was just created out of nothing by Galactus.
Right.
I'm surprised if people really like that idea that no one has done it since. Like, you could have created a new character and just have Galactus create something out of scratch. But the second one is, I feel like when they did that graphic novel in the late 70s, The Ultimate Cosmic Experience, I feel like Jack was now cool with that.
Yeah, well, well, it's fun if you see the correspondence, I mean, and when I went to Stan's archives, some of it's been, reprinted, because I brought it back to the Tomorrow's people. I put in the Stanley Universe book that I did with Roy Thomas and other places. The correspondence, there's letters back and forth. Oh, Stan writes, "It was great to see you," and Jack says, "How great it was to see you." And they're very polite and friendly, like maybe actual friends. Who knows? And then Jack sends in the artwork, and there's an accompanying, literally a document, like a typed up page 1, panel 1. Here's what's in it, and he does that for every single panel, so that somebody, whether it's a lawyer, an executive, historians, somebody will know that what he intended. Now, of course, then Stan goes back and scripts it, and we'll never know what went on. Stan made a trip to California to visit with Jack to plot the Silver Surfer. What does that mean? I have not seen. I've only seen stuff written by Jack. I don't remember if Jack did a synopsis or just went right to script with it, or maybe drew it and then decide, I don't know what Jack's process was, but from Stan, there's only kind of, boy, I really enjoyed plotting, and if we do what we talked about, it's going to be great, They had, as Roy Thomas says, because look, there's one theory, right? There's a theory that in 1941 or 42, part of what led Simon and Kirby to leaving was that they were already doing work for DC at night, because they were getting ready to leave, but they weren't quite ready. And Stan found out about it. And Kirby, and then shortly thereafter, Goodman found out about it. Now, comics is such an incestuous, gossipy business. There could have been 100 different people that told them, but supposedly Kirby always thought that Stan had ratted them out. I asked Roy about that, who knew them both, and I said, "Do you think that's true that Jack hated Stan since 1942?" And he said, "No, it's much more. Their relationship was much more complicated than that." So, I think they obviously they weren't socializing and they weren't friends. In that article, there was an article in a newspaper in the Herald Tribune that painted Stan out to be like a movie star and Jack to be like a foreman in a girdle factory. I mean, it really was, which I think hurt Roz Kirby more than Jack. I'm sure Jack didn't love it, and they somehow blamed it on Stan. There were a lot of bumps in the road. There had to be some level on which they got along, if only because they knew each other. They were like cash cows for each other,
Yeah.
I think it was complicated. I ultimately it went very sour, but yeah, it was, but I think the tone of those letters and right, what you were saying about the graphic novel, indicates that for that project, look, Kirby got to do the project, and I guess he was satisfied with how it came out. I don't know, but yeah, I think it went through ups and downs, and I don't know. I have no real definitive answer, but you're right. That particular project does seem like they were that Jack had gotten over it. He didn't have a choice. I mean, again, he didn't. And I think his answer to that was going. I think those fourth world characters. I think he'd been stockpiling those. I think he supposedly, he had like mentioned them to Stan one time to maybe do them at Marvel, and Stan was like, "Yeah, that's great, Jack. Go back to Thor." I mean,
those are obviously Thor characters.
Right. But I don't. So there was, but whether that's true or not, Kirby was stockpiling them, and I think yeah, and but then you're right. But then the Silver Surfer was like 8 years later. It's a look. It's like Lennon. I think the closest comparison is Lennon and McCartney. Or these are passionate, creative, driven people. It's sort of right. People accuse Stan or whoever was a ruthless careerist. Well, probably, but if it wasn't a ruthless careerist, you never would have heard of him. I mean, sort of. That's the people you hear of the ruthless career. The people who are less, who have Ruth, and you don't hear so much about.
If anyone has any last questions for Danny Fingeroth, please put them in the chat. I think another thing about Stan and his views on religion is that, and I don't know how much of this was Jack and how much of this was Stan, but if you take a look at how the Asgardians treated Odin in that particular Thor run, I feel like it was very religion-based.
Well, the Norse. Yeah, I think it was Stan.
But it didn't feel Nordic.
Look, my I'm the person who who interpreted like the Jewish roots of the mighty Thor. I'm the one who like, not as a kid, but looking back when I was writing one of my books, disguised as Clark Kent, read a lot of those Thor issues in a row. And there is Thor pleading with Odin to allow him to marry this Earth girl, this mortal woman. And I'm thinking, well, that sounds a lot like things that you hear, certainly among Jewish people and probably among other religions too, that, about intermarriage and and there's Odin, looking like the biblical, like you would imagine, like Michelangelo drawing God, drawing the Hebraic God. And there's some Old Testament thing about, especially with Stan using that Shakespearean thee and thou stuff. I mean, it went on for issue after issue. I want to marry her, I love her, but God may not marry her. I mean, this was like so much like a kitchen table argument in a Jewish home about whether the son could marry this nice Gentile girl that he met. And then she goes to Asgard, she converts, she gets superpowers, and it's disastrous, right? She destroys the palace, and Odin sends her back to Earth, and he arranges for Thor to meet a nice Asgardian girl, Sif. That's so. I mean, I thought, well, I don't know about. It doesn't seem to me they would have been doing this intentionally, but it is interesting that Kirby literally married the Jewish girl next door, and Stan married this exotic Presbyterian Gentile woman. And sort of they both had different answers to the same question. But I really could feel that dynamic, in the story. So yeah, I think it's very Old Testament. Even the names Kirby gave a lot of the Eternals characters and the New Gods characters were kind of
Isaiah and
um,
Ezekiel.
yeah, I mean, look, it's comics, so it's a hodgepodge of and a synthesis of 100 different mythologies, but that struck me. So yeah, I think Odin, was not very Nordic. He was, but he wasn't. He was Jewish by way of like the classical painters. He was like, the god of the Jews as painted by Rembrandt. Michelangelo.
Yeah, the long white hair, and because we've seen many depictions of mythical Odin since, and he doesn't look like that. So
Right.
usually he's got an eye patch and whatnot.
Yeah. So look, the two of them together and it's a look, there were so many people trying to imitate Marvel in the 60s, so many companies, people and very talented people, right? Jerry Siegel and Wally Wood and but nobody could recreate what it was that the combination of Stan and Jack and Steve love or hate each other, whatever percentage they gave on a given panel, whatever it was, it made, it led to us here today talking 60 years later.
It's funny to me because everybody, the Stan haters will usually say something like Stan never created anything as big outside of Jack or Steve. And flipping that script, like they didn't either without Stan.
And it's, and it's as if even the most brilliant genius, if you could bottle it, everybody would do it, right? I mean, it's the people, the place, the time in history, that, I mean, just that's where things we know about come, the things we know and remember and that last come from, it's just, you can't plan. I've been involved in a number of enterprises where our plan was to create a unified universe of characters and heroes and hope it succeeds, but usually they don't.
And I think for me also, and you might disagree with this, the most famous image that any of the three of them came up with is that cover to Amazing Fantasy number 15, which all three of them did.
That's interesting. Yeah. Is that the most famous image they ever did? Probably. Yeah, I guess it
right?
probably. Yeah.
We have one last question from JD Schaffner. What is your favorite Stan book? Thank you and Happy New Year.
Thank you. What do you mean by book about Stan or comic book that he wrote?
A comic book, because he says that his is Fantastic Four.
Yeah, and the first 100 issues of Fantastic Four. There's a guy, I forget his name, but there's somebody who has a website called like, the premise of the website is Stan never got to write the great American novel. He just wrote the Fantastic Four, and that's his and Jack's great American novel. Yeah. Again, I was the perfect age for it, when it came out, but followed closely by maybe the first 50 issues of Spider-Man. But the first, and people, a lot of people will say, Fantastic Four didn't pick up speed and hit its stride till issue 30, whatever, I think it hit its stride from issue 1, well, actually issue 1 wasn't that great, but I think it hit its stride. It wasn't,
Yeah.
but from issue 2, for all
Yeah.
its crudeness and silliness, and again, because I was buying it every month, I was witnessing this thing that, I've been reading comics for 5 years, which was more than half my life at that point. So this was this new thing. And every month there was some incredible thing. And I guess sort of a topic that we touched on, even everybody remembers the Galactus trilogy. Nobody remembers like those, not so historic Human Torch stories that preceded Nick, the Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., there's a lot of stories that don't get talked about because they weren't that great, but they fulfilled the bargain with a kid, which was, okay, maybe this won't be as good as Fantastic Four, but it's still a pretty good deal for 12 cents, and it's fulfilling the bargain of like, here's my money, entertain me for 20 minutes. And they did it, so, but yeah, my favorite is far and away, Fantastic Four.
It surprises me. I
How
think just because
come?
I associate you with Spider-Man so much.
Spider-Man was an acquired taste for me. I mean, I bought Spider-Man. I missed Amazing Fantasy 15, but I had Spider-Man 1 and on, and
Is it because Steve is weird?
I liked it. I have a fondness for it, but it wasn't really until I became the Spider-Man editor that I really came to appreciate how great the character was. What hit me, as much as I related to the Tony Stark, Iron Man, heart issues, pardon the expression. The
No
Fantastic,
offense taken.
the Fantastic Four really put it together. Do you want to try to play that video, or should I just?
Yeah, we can try to play it.
All right. Well, let's try to play it. Let's try to play it. So I have to hit the share screen. No, I'll play that, but then let's come back and wrap up if that's okay.
Yeah.
This is Stanley at his most charming. This is old Stanley, most charming. Kind of channeling old Groucho. Let's see.
You'd have to hit the share screen, yeah.
Okay, I have to hit the share screen first. Okay. Uh-oh, now I lost you. Uh-oh. Exit. What do I do? Let's try. All right, let's finish this. You still there, Duy?
I'm still here.
Okay. Let me see. We can't do it. So hit the share screen first. Okay, then. Yeah, so then you see, I don't think that, I think I have to end the share. Sorry, folks. I think I have to.
You want to send it to me? I could do it.
I sent you the link last week. I don't know if you give me one. Hold, let me just try.
Oh, yeah. Okay, here we go.
Are you seeing it?
Yeah, I could do it.
Okay. So you'll do it.
Yeah,
All right.
let me share my screen. I was gonna say, yeah, I was pretty indisposed last week.
Yeah, I know. Well, if you can't, we'll send people, we'll post the link.
Let me share it here. Stanley sings Cocktails for Two. Share sound.
Which some of you may know from the Spike Jones version. There we go.
All right, here we go. 1, 2, let me just put up the volume. 1, 2, 3.
Rendezvous that overlooks the avenue, with someone sharing a delightful chat of this and that, and
I don't know.
Cocktails
Cocktails and wine. Oh, it's the same song.
Cocktails for two.
I thought it was cocktails and wine.
No, cocktails for
Cocktails
two.
for two.
as we enjoy a cigarette to some enchanting soissonnette, two hands are sure to slyly meet beneath the serviette, and
Cocktails for two.
There you go.
my head may go reeling, but my heart will be obedient, with intoxicating kisses for the principal ingredient. Most any afternoon at 5, we'll be so glad we're both alive. Then maybe fortune will complete her plan that all began with
Cocktails for two.
Okay, sync was. The
Sync
sync
was a
was,
little,
yeah, but thank you. Doy, I am so glad that you're back and that you are healing, and I wish you nothing but the best and go from strength to strength. It was a great pleasure to see you and do this.
and it was a great pleasure. It's a great pleasure to end 2022 with you on the Comics Cube, celebrating Stan Lee. I'm very happy about it.
Happy Stan Centennial. And
Happy Stan Centennial.
all right, take care, Doy. Take care, everybody.
Take
Thank-
care.
Okay, I'm leaving. That was great.
There we go.
Thank you. All right, I'll let you go.